I'm placing an order at Chipotle HQ and a robot is going to help build it. This is Hyphen. While a team member builds my burrito up there, Hyphen automatically builds burrito bowls and salads down here. Like that. Ta-da! Then the bowl meets the burrito. Pretty cool.
Welcome back to The Foundry Alley. I'm your host, Sri Kalimani. This is an interview with Daniel Fukuba, the co-founder and CTO of Hyphen. Hyphen is a food automation company building robotics for fresh meal prep and service. Today we're going to be talking about the vast world of food services and its intersection with robotics. Food services is one of the hardest domains to automate because it's typically seen as low margin, highly variable, and has many handling complexities. But Hyphen is challenging that status quo with incremental successes over the years and now working with large accounts including Chipotle and Cava. Daniel is a serial entrepreneur based in the Bay Area with a number of successes in robotics. Before Hyphen, Daniel worked across aerospace, automotive, semiconductor, and food manufacturing. He built automated systems for Merlin rocket assembly at SpaceX, assembly work cells for Tesla, and automation around applied materials. All of this led Daniel to food services. Food is wet, sticky, deformable, inconsistent, temperature sensitive, and needs to be handled in a repeatable manner. And Daniel gets to the root of this problem in a way that's applicable to all robotics companies. How do you build a machine that creates real ROI in low margin and operationally messy environments? Daniel has one of the most unique backgrounds out of all the engineers and founders I've met in robotics. He's not classically trained as an engineer. Daniel dropped out of high school and learned systems engineering by building. He started early on and stays close to the hardware and software, so he understands when the machine breaks and why, but also stays close enough to customers and operators to understand what actually matters in a product. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. What makes a great product that can create real ROI in challenging environments with robotics? I'm here today with Daniel Fukuba, the co-founder and CTO of Hyphen. Daniel, thank you so much for joining. It's super exciting to be talking with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
Awesome. So kicking off, how does food services work? What are the important things there? So Hyphen, you work with companies like Chipotle, Cava. What is it that they care about and how have you've been thinking about that to build out what Hyphen is?
Yeah, it's a really interesting industry. There's tons of different segments throughout it. My background's in industrial automation and robotics. So going into from a world where you have different manufacturing segments, same thing's true in food service, having the commercial segment going into retail food, quick service, fast casual, like fast food chains, or a quick service like a Chipotle or Cava. And then even on the non-commercial side, there's a fairly large market going into feeding of troops in military type environments or going to the corporate campuses at a Google, Netflix, and whatnot, and even data centers today, having to feed all the folks that run those operations. So what we started with was actually our early days of being a restaurant ourselves. And then post-pandemic, we decided to partner with restaurants. And that's where we had our strongest ties. So in that world, in space of quick service, folks really care about how do you get more incremental revenue. And almost all of the top brands out there right now, when you go on their app, order for lunch, and they'll ask you to choose what time slot you want to pick things up, or they'll tell you what slot you fit into. That's called a throttle. So they break apart their time periods into typically 15-minute segments, and they'll set a capacity for that. And that capacity gauges how much revenue they're going to get for that lunch rush, and it will match their deployments. So what you really want to do is see how you can increase the throttle if there's demand in those distribution of stores. And with your automation or equipment, whatever it is you're selling into these brands with, can you help them grow and can it continue growing? Because that's what they're promising the market as they're looking to continue to build their business. So they, in general, have problems with staffing, even more so post-COVID, and it hasn't gotten any better. A lot of Gen Z and the new folks who would typically, I don't know what job you had when you were right out of in high school or whatnot. I did dishwashing in middle school for a catering company in Menlo Park, and then I was a host at a burger joint in Palo Alto to get some cash to build robots back in the day. And these days, folks are becoming creators, or they're driving for DoorDash and doing these gig economy type work. So it's just a much harder labor pool to tap into. So there really is like this desire of how do you make a way for the lunch rush to be more consistent and give it more capacity, because the marketing teams and business development teams at these brands are pushing more demand on the stores. But if they can't supply the labor, they're not going to capture that revenue.
I'm curious why that came to call throttle, but how much maybe variability you see per hour or per shift, even maybe per day?
Yeah, you could typically, let's say over a 60-minute period, targeting, I'd say generally we've seen 60 orders per hour is what things will be staffed to nominally. But if it's a store that doesn't have enough labor, they'll either do two things. They'll keep the throttle where it's at and then overload their labor and then not be able to satisfy on-time delivery for guests, or they'll taper it down and just accept that they can't generate as much revenue for that day. So it depends on the brand and which stores. You can look at some stores that may be trending and growing pretty quickly that may have up to $7 million AUV. So it's annual unit volume, how much revenue they're getting through that store unit per year.
Mm-hmm.
And then could go all the way down to sub 1 million, depending on where in the distribution you are.
So I assume this was one of the major considerations in terms of how you were starting to think about building the product. But what are some other factors? Like, is there wastage that comes out of this, or inventory management, and maybe even changing recipes or ingredient volume, things like that?
Yeah, definitely. The big thing from let's say like metrics that when in the end of the day, we're really looking at to make sure we match and can balance out with the rest of the store operations. Because for anyone here who's read The Goal, a great book about manufacturing, there's, as soon as you automate one area, you're starting to push that bottleneck elsewhere. So you got to be very cautious about what your downstream, upstream processes are from a capacity and cycle time perspective, and match your solution, in our case, our make line and machine that's building these digital orders to those productivity measures. So the on-time delivery is a big one that we're always watching. So when you make a promise to a customer that they can pick up their meal at this time, we need to make sure it's ready by then. The processing time is another thing, because you want to be able to allow your customers to be able to walk up, pull up on a store, make your digital order, and get it as fast as possible. So that cutoff time for when orders batch into these throttles could be as low as 5 minutes or just a couple minutes. So the processing time of how long does it take for a unit of production to go through your system is important, as well as the hitting the time, and then your overall capacity. So how many units you can flow through if you're working on them in parallel will be what we look at from a productivity side. From the, let's say, traditional manufacturing metrics of yield and quality, there is a desire from a culinary perspective as well of, let's say, when you buy your bowl and you have any option of ingredients to put in it, if in most cases, if you select every single thing on that menu, it's going to overflow that bowl with a standard portion size. So we do a lot of things and how we're ordering and routing orders throughout the system to make them more productive, but then also adjust and scale based on culinary and finance intent. So if you always want to look at, see your bowl full, if you add 2 items to it or you add 20, we have to work with teams on our customer side from culinary intent, as well as the finance and unit economics of that bowl, to make sure we're scaling the right ingredients and meeting customer expectations. And then waste, of course, is a huge point. I'd say there's a lot of mechanisms already in place at these large brands to manage waste very efficiently. So you have to be cautious about if you are contributing to the critical inventory of food. So maybe not everything needs to be tracked, but there's a few SKUs that do matter, and the price of that portion of that SKU is really critical. And we'll watch that while we're testing and dialing things in. You can make things go super fast, but it might be messier, and you can slow it down and make it really precise. So that's always a push and pull depending on stakeholders on the customer side. And our job is to give them enough dials to be able to adjust that to reach where they want.
Yeah. Is there sort of a personality selector? Like if I want my bowl to always be full, to the brim.
That would totally be, we could totally do that and provide it. It's up to the brand to expose what they want. And I think our team may have some Easter eggs in there for different types of orders that you would make if you meet folks on our team and get those Easter eggs and how you submit your orders.
What about so we talked about bowls themselves, and this is another branding element that companies care about and want to really maintain. Have there been any design challenges with that and incorporating the different types of bowls and sizes and all of that?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. In how we architected our system is to be really modular. You got to make decisions on where do you put those breakpoints of modularity. You don't want to make it an erector set, but you also don't want to make it a monolithic single piece thing that you can't change and not be flexible. So what we've discovered working with dozens of brands out there and implementing their menus and culinary on our system, as well as their brand to be produced and created on our system, is packaging is critical. If you've ever been to Sweet Green, you'll see that hexagonal bowl. It's very iconic. Same goes with Chipotle. There's this oval bowl shape. And then another brand may have something else. So that packaging and how you handle it is one out of the three things that we see being a key variable to be able to have modularity around to give to our customers. So packaging is one. Two is the menu. How do you accommodate all the variety of ingredients? When you work with a upstart company that is just starting off and building their culinary, they may be very willing to adjust their ingredients and their prep to work with the machine. But if you're a Chipotle and Cava, you built your brand around that culinary. So making changes there is almost a no-go area and zone within the partnership. So we need to adapt to those ingredients. And then the third is the integrations to point of sale or how orders are coming in and being sent to the machine. Every restaurant has their own ITRS or IT restaurant systems groups, which have put together and pieced a lot of off-the-shelf systems from different restaurant technology companies or built their own middleware. We'll have to integrate with that and really work through the business logic of how have they created their systems, what do they use to make sure the stored fleet is operating properly, and how do we gracefully integrate into that and make all of these decisions that now you need to codify into the programming of the system and the integration based off of what people may be doing today. And there may be endpoints that don't exist yet in their systems that we need to work with them to create. Same vice versa on our end.
And so on that piece, how do companies look at maybe fleets of these systems or managing those? Do they prefer to do that in-house? Like, do they want dashboarding, type of tool where they can see the efficiency and make these changes for 20, 30 centers at once? And how do you think about maybe bringing those capabilities to?
Yeah, that's a good point. It really varies depending on the maturity of the brand, where they're at with their development and their IT system. So we've gone all the way from going and piping all of our telemetry into their data lakes, working within Snowflake, creating all the reporting that's needed for finance teams to know what's going on in the store. In the end, if you're a public brand, you are looking at what's the impact to your earnings per share and how does that get traced through? And these teams are extremely good at looking at every single KPI and how that impacts it. So when we can provide them additional telemetry to let them know what's going on in the store, they want that, and we'll spend time integrating that through their business analytics, business intelligence, and all their reporting that they'll do across a fleet. And say from a fleet deployment perspective, you're looking at the distribution of low volume stores to the highest outlier in the country, and you'll pick a large group of where does this make the most impact, deploy within there, and then see the reporting of things such as refund rates, look at those improvements, look at the throughput throttles and how you can increase them. And when you're controlling the machine, we've had large public companies rip out their traditional point of sale systems and KDS systems and built from the ground up custom software that will integrate with our equipment. We have webhooks for everything to allow you to see on your own screens at the customer side that may be developed in-house or with consultants like Accenture or Deloitte to provide their own HMIs branded for their training programs and what they want to tell their customers. Whereas another company may have off-the-shelf solutions where we're looking to utilize our HMIs, our interfaces and reporting and fleet management. What needs to be changed more often, and all the stuff that we talked about earlier of how do you scale these ingredients, make sure your volume is consistent in the bowl, not just the weight. That can be dialed in beforehand while you're going through piloting. And then afterwards, you don't need to change that too often. But a key thing that drives demand to restaurants is limited time offerings. So you'll see every season or more frequently these days, COVID's really when things picked up like crazy with LTOs or limited time offerings. And that does require changes of the line build. So where do you put things on the machine? What dispensers will you use to dispense that new ingredient? And then how do you validate the process around that ingredient from a quality, food safety, and productivity perspective?
There's a lot of these nuances that we don't really think about when we're just going to Chipotle and just getting our bowl, or even like Starbucks.
It's really dialed in. They're experts at what they do, and all these brands are. They have to be. Like their turnover of food within the store is the name of the game. And how do you generate demand, and how do you fulfill it super efficiently? So
if you don't notice the things behind the system, that is a very well-oiled machine. So I think that getting automation into that is huge. There's a big standard to cross there in terms of efficiency and what you need to be able to do.
Totally. Yeah, people are really good at adapting to all these things. So there's always we need to train better. We need to, have our employees do, follow the process and have more training for them to follow this. But in the end, people are really good at adapting to all these small nuances and hitting that intent. And when you program it into a machine, it's incredibly repeatable, but you can't always adapt to every single nuance. And that's where the cultural shift and change of what culinary teams may want to see or what operations teams want to see, that changes how they think about what their job is now that they have this machine compared to before. And that's a biggest thing that we've learned while working with these large brands is you can make something that works, and that's hard, but that's probably not the hardest part of the problem. Being able to successfully integrate and balance out every stakeholder. And let's say at a brand of the size of a Chipotle or Cava, we may have 9 key departments that we need to balance out those needs from and help redefine what is their job with this system compared to with a team of people, but now team of people augmented with machines.
So on the go-to-market side now, you partner with Chipotle and Cava. These are large accounts. So what has been your thinking in terms of going deeper into one of these companies that has maybe a lot of chains, but definitely operationally intense versus having a more general system that applies to different types of restaurants and automation?
Yeah, I don't think they're too different from us technology side in the way that we've approached it. And that's really key is when we first signed up to let's partner with one of these large enterprises, which we had a Gen 1 system, which looks very different than our product today. And we had the CEO and CTO of Chipotle fly out to us 2 days after they met us and spent the day going through our system, testing it out. They really loved the vision and what the product did, but it needed to fit in all of their existing stores today with their operations and how they prep their food and their facility connections. They're not going to retrofit thousands of stores. It needs to be a brownfield deployment that's a one-for-one replacement of their equipment today. So there's a lot of design work we had to do in our second generation product to meet those specs. But as we did that, we kept in mind that 90% of this product, we're going to put breakpoints in the modularity in the system architecture such that we can deploy it to other brands. And that's where those 3 points I was talking about earlier of packaging, menu, and integrations, we've developed ways for us to basically, without any engineering, we can swap those out for a different type of packaging or a different menu and different integrations. So that is a key thing going into the technology side. On the go-to-market side, having a big customer is really great from a halo effect. You get the credibility, you get the excitement from investors and the excitement from your team that you're working with one of these marquee accounts. What we look at from our pipelines is the expected units per quarter we're going to deploy. And we put a factor on what's the time to first install, and we put a factor on how many installs would we achieve the addressable market with that customer after we have validated and we've shown success. And then what's the probability of closing these deals? So there's these really big and slower customers, and then we have these small and fast customers. And we have to be really cautious of, our judgment of what's customer success going to look like on the other end when we deploy. But we'll be always gauging how much to invest and steer towards these large, big accounts and then mid-market or SMB accounts as well. But in the early days when we're developing a product to be able to meet those requirements with an enterprise account, it's very focused on that and being able to hit those milestones and ensure you can validate the technology, validate the process, and then also the operational changes and transformation going on the customer end.
You mentioned a couple of metrics there that are super useful, but if you had to pick one as the kind of North Star for really seeing a product deployment, what would that metric be for you now? And maybe that'll change
Totally.
over time.
Time to expansion, probably, in that like gap from when you do the time of the first install. It's really critical when you're engaging new opportunities. But what is the profile of the customer for operational change? Where there's a lot of human elements to this, especially when you're going into an industry that when you look at a picture of a fast casual kitchen today, and I bring this up in our all hands and our summit decks all the time with our team, but photo from 150 years ago. They look very similar. It's the same layout and same type of equipment out there, or modern versions of that equipment, but everything you're doing as a chef or line cook is a very similar job. And we're asking them to change that. And that's really hard. It's not like the manufacturing space where there already is this in Lean or Six Sigma, I call it like Jidoka. It's kind of the Toyota way of the intelligence of a person and the muscle of a machine. There's that kind of expectation already that there's going to be a lot of machine tools and automation and productivity transformations or ops transformations inside a factory. That isn't necessarily the case with equipment inside food service. So you're up against what is that willingness to change what your job is, adjust your risk profiles. Even if you have something that has lower risk and better safety in many different ways, it reshuffles and lays out what that risk profile looks like. And that could be really scary for a brand that doesn't want to lose the farm. And their job is to make sure they maintain that brand and continue to grow it. They don't want to change too much and risk the brand perception. So the tolerance and velocity of that change, and we'll do full stakeholder maps, look at what their incentives are, what jobs are being asked to change, and look for proof points along the way of our early pilots to see, are those customers adapting in a trajectory that could start to yield a faster rollout for us? Or are we seeing a lot of resistance because there's so much pride across what those jobs are today? And that's really critical from an expansion standpoint for us as a startup to get installed base.
Totally. And change management, it's a lot of factors that you just don't control and can really, I think, affect you if you don't have an understanding of that going in. And so props to you guys for building out that stakeholder map early on and knowing the fields that you're getting into and all of the hurdles that you have to kind of cross on that regulatory side as well.
Yeah, a lot of battle scars along the way to learn what all those hidden trapdoors are along the way. Yeah, it's a continual thing. And every brand's different too. We see it in founder-led brands versus where there's hired executives. Everything can be different depending on who you're working with. And it's always refreshing when you work with a startup brand and they're like the same mentality as us and let's go, but you may not have as much deployment opportunity on the other end once you get that out there. So yeah, you have to balance out what you're going to focus the organization around and make sure you get that transformation and success.
I want to get a little bit into your background and your journey and what led to Hyphen. You have a very unique background, very unique profile, born and raised in the Bay Area, so really growing up in that Silicon Valley culture. And you're a very early founder and you've had many successful exits along the way as well. For a brief period of time went maybe outside of robotics. So would love to hear that journey from you and how you've kind of changed as a person as well through all of these experiences.
Yeah, it's super interesting growing up in the Bay Area. I grew up in San Jose and then Palo Alto throughout my youth, and having always been kind of a gearhead. My uncle was competed in BattleBots back in the 90s, or early 2000s. So when I was in middle school, I would go to these events. There was this kind of inaugural Robo Games where it was kind of like the Olympics, or they called it Robo Olympics back before they had to change that because of trademarks. But it was super cool just to see as a kid, like all these robots walking around and robots playing humanoid robots back in 20 years ago playing soccer and BattleBots along right next to it. So going.
Wait, so we solved it 20 years ago?
I would say it was solved. They weren't moving around that fast. So there were a lot of research teams from Japan and other countries for robot soccer that were going on for sure. And it was just super, eye-opening of being in the Bay Area and, being able to drive by the HP garage in Palo Alto, or where we lived, Steve Jobs being down the street, or all these other really incredible, legendary people. And like the first Waymos back in the self-driving car days, seeing those Priuses drive around with encoders bolted onto the side of their wheel hubs. So I think it was probably inevitable for me to fall into being in this world in some way or another. And having just the proximity to all these folks was super, I was just really lucky. And that as a kid, I remember my grandmother watching TV and seeing, I think it was in the 2000 New Year's, they had a whole Segway park going across, the Dean Kamen's first Segway invention. And I was just obsessed with it and wanted one, and decided I'll try to build one, and found someone who had a blog post of them building a Segway and then also some robots on balancing wheels. Cold emailed this person, said I was interested in what they were doing, wanted to build it myself. They responded back, and it turned out to be Trevor Blackwell, the co-founder of Y Combinator. And that was just someone who was super generous with his time to have a kid from the neighborhood be able to just show up, and he would spend hours with me going through programming this thing, how the electrical designs and schematics were built on these boards. And I bought a toaster oven, would do the reflow of these boards and trying to figure out the BOM through DigiKey orders that he had, and then going over and calibrating gyros and accelerometers in the first YC office in Mountain View to build this. And I had no idea what YC was until like 6 years later. And there was this amazing, generous person who just would answer an email from a kid. And I think that was what was so great about the Bay Area, is just having these incredible, legendary people being that generous with their time to help other people out. And even in high school, the robotics team that we had, one of the kids' parents, so one of my closest friends today and mentor of mine throughout my career, was the co-inventor of the inkjet printer at HP Labs. Having that type of people teach you and spend time and invest in your education or projects that you can work on, and giving you these opportunities, I think is just really incredible in a place like this. So that started off and kicked off, I'd say, in high school. I was part-time. Well, I was running the robotics team, got obsessed with FIRST Robotics and competing there. Also had a kind of robotic kit business, selling robot kits on the side. And my mentor, this gentleman, Chris Stackland, started a company making self-balancing motorcycles effectively to provide a new transportation method. He had just gotten some initial funding, and I went straight working with him and built out these first prototypes and vehicles. And just being able to do that while you're in high school was an incredible opportunity.
I just traveled to the past almost, and I'm, imagining the streets of San Jose and, Palo Alto with these Priuses and just like LiDARs fitted on them. And it's just totally different world from probably anywhere else. How's the Bay Area now? Like, how do you feel about the same ecosystem?
This is a good question. I don't know. I'd have to ask some folks younger than me now what their experiences have been like, but Palo Alto feels very different. If you drive down University Ave, for anyone who grew up there, will say the same thing of just it feels a lot more built out, a lot more people going to it because it's Palo Alto. So I think there's been a bit of that kind of college town vibe that is maybe overtaken through how much money and companies and startups throughout all their success has brought a lot more money that's visible, I'd say, maybe in those areas. And it does seem maybe harder to get access to some of these folks and individuals, just given how much inbound and demand there is on everyone's time, especially these days. It's, I think, be interesting to see. But what's really incredible, when I was captain of the robotics team at Palo Alto High School, there was maybe 15 core folks, where now they have 100 plus students in the robotics team, and they have tryouts, which was unheard of. We were like the people in the corner that no one cared about, like the AV geeks almost in the robotics lab. And now it's like the thing to do. So that's pretty incredible to see. I think there probably is just a lot more things built out for this type of exposure to give kids, which is awesome to see. And I think a lot more like a participation in FIRST Robotics, which is incredible. So that's a great end to see, I think.
Do you mentor kids now, or people that are
We do
in this
internship
field?
programs, and we're pretty generous in bringing interns in and working with them. One of our directors of systems integration is an incredible person, Chris Lee. He will set up for our interns a full program so that they can really start to work on some new skills, get exposure to real things that will ship, and then at the end have presentations and artifacts that they can bring with them to back to school or to jobs. And we've had high school interns as well work with us, and we'll spend the time to invest in that. So I'd say from that perspective, for sure. And there's always more to do. One of my friends has a whole field in East Palo Alto for First Robotics that he'll host practice events and mentor the robotics teams in East Palo Alto and the surrounding area. So I'll try to get over there as much as I can, but not as much these days. I wish I could do more.
On a different angle slightly, what do you think founders or investors should really think about when it comes to robotics? Like, what are some of the gaps or misunderstandings in your experience so far?
Yeah, it's interesting. So in 2010 is when I started working in robotics in the solar industry. And I think from then it's changed pretty significantly to now post Cloud Code, physical AI, and all the new foundation models that are being built out. So in the end, what business impact are you making needs to be really clear unless you are, in a category of companies building out the future, like an Anthropic or OpenAI and Foundation or Generalist. That's, building these root capabilities and, pushing the boundaries of what technology can provide that has such a massive promise on the other end. Maybe very different, but in applied robotics and getting them deployed into already operational environments. Unit economics is super critical. And I think it can get very mixed and muddled of what that company is doing. Is there a lot of research going into it and developing the next model, or is it a practical machinery type application that you're going in and using these new technologies more intentionally in very targeted ways to enhance the capabilities of that machine, or what type of customers you can bring on to open up the market or change the dynamics of how your business can grow. There's a spectrum there, and I think it can get muddled up pretty broadly with how companies are being pitched and what the investors are expecting from returns and what you're actually delivering to your customer. So being really clear on what bets you're making as a business and how you're communicating that to investors, I think is a really important perspective to have and be able to communicate clearly with your team and customers and investors. But I think on the investor side, I see a lot of companies getting funded, which we'll see how they are developed, but there's a lot of promise of that massive world-changing impact of the technology. But when you actually go to the sites or the factories or the facilities that these are deployed at, they're doing a very different job that needs to get done, and people just need a task done with these machines. So there's a lot of fluff going on in the robotics world because there's so much money going into it right now. And there's some really legitimately amazing technologies being built out that's super exciting and it will change the world. But I think as a founder, you got to be really targeted and intentional because you're super resource constrained. No matter how much money you've raised or how big your team is, you're always going to be resource constrained. So making sure you're accumulating proof points and real feedback loops into the product you're building with these new technologies. Yeah, you got to be really clear about.
Do you think funding is always going to be necessary if you're building a robotics company? Or do you think there's a way to bootstrap your way?
Depends on how fast you want to grow. But the last firm I was at running engineering for was a traditional RIA system integrator. We would take robot arms from Fanuc, Mitsubishi, ABB, and deploy them into customers who needed work cells and automation. In that case, it was a bootstrap company. There were different vehicles of debt that were taken on to grow the business and to manage cash flow when you have these big jobs that may take a year or 24 months to execute on. But I think there are ways to have customer funding behind these projects if you are not investing so heavily into R&D and you're spending more of your time in engineering and integrating and deploying these systems. There are segments that have the budgets to fund these things. So it's a mix, I think, but if you're doing something more new and cutting edge, you're likely going to need to raise some funding to help build the resources and do that R&D work.
Makes sense. So for Hyphen, I'm curious what that founding journey was like. Did you start out with arms, like off-the-shelf arms, and then actually building out the full make line solution. What were some of those decision points there?
Yeah, when we started the company, it was in 2018. And the original vision was my co-founder, Stephen Klein, and I were automation maximalist, and that we had a vehicle be the restaurant and automation as well to offset labor. So there were two things that are pretty big on the P&L for food service. The third thing being food cost. But we started with a smoothie brand, and we raised pre-seed funding after putting together a prototype that I was living in New York at the time, was in my apartment on SolidWorks, making this smoothie push cart concept, as my co-founder had been at Instacart early on, and Max Mullen, one of the co-founders there, had said he would be interested in investing if we could make something that works, make a machine that makes a smoothie. So spent a few weeks designing this, had all the parts shipped out to California to my friend's shop in San Mateo, went out for a wedding for 2 weeks, assembled this whole thing, wired it up, programmed it, and made an app. And by the end of that 2 weeks, on the day my flight was that evening, we invited Max over and then made a smoothie for him. So I'd say robot arm to purpose built. My past of deploying many robot arms, they're super useful in moving things in this spherical workspace. If you're trying to get automation up and running right away, you can buy a robot arm and it will just be able to put something from here to there in that spherical workspace with just programming it. You don't have to design the whole machine of conveyance systems and other material handling systems to accomplish that work. You also can make it adaptable to feedback and whatever sensing and arm tooling you design for it to get process variation, be able to adapt to that process variation in a larger workspace as well, the spherical workspace. But we would make that trade-off all the time at L2F, where I was at, to decide what's more important for this job. And in most cases, speed was what was most important. That's why a lot of robot arms are used in manufacturing, because the time to get the factory up and running and making products to ship out and generate revenue, you'll spend a lot of money to get that going quickly. So robot arms are an easy way just to move things around wherever you need them to. But if you're going to start to optimize and really hone in on a process that you want to make as efficient as possible, my belief in general, and just the amount of work that needs to be done by the system, having a 30 kilogram arm, moving 30 grams of food starts to look really inefficient, especially when you need 3-phase power and these large controllers to operate these machines. So we always took the approach of, let's figure out where we can create constraints and create a mostly structured environment, because we'll be operating in it. And things like kitchens are very structured, that you can create automation in the most efficient way possible and deploy just the right amount of energy and work that the system does to accomplish that task. And you'll end up with a lower cost solution, which within the food service industry is really critical. That's why there's not that much automation today, because of two things: that process variability is high. Food's not a rigid material like a wafer in semiconductor material handling or automotive and aerospace components for the most part, where you have these rigid bodies you're moving around in assembling or manufacturing. So creating a structured environment in the way we can to then lower the cost of the CapEx, so you can get the returns that you need in food service for CapEx, where they'll be getting 50% cash on cash returns first year of opening up a store. And those stores cost $600,000 to $800,000 to open. So you don't want to be pushing out what those return profiles are when the public markets are looking for a good place to invest, and these companies have created that vehicle for them. And so you want to improve that and not increase CapEx, meaning we're stripping out anything that's unnecessary. Simplify the problem, simplify the mechanisms, simplify the automation as much as possible so you can drive and deliver a really low cost system. But that's where on the food truck side, we started off and we became our own restaurant. Pandemic hit. It was becoming pretty clear, but that really kind of put the nail in the coffin for us of, it's really not a good idea to start a restaurant brand as you're trying to develop this technology. There's two different risk profiles and your business model is very different if you're creating restaurants. So us being technologists and people who know how to build machines, we decided let's take that bet instead of the other. And we partnered with the salad chains that were out there to start making a machine that was more tailored towards them. And we looked at what was really high mix, low volume type scenarios. Salad bars are great cases because They'll, unlike a Chipotle that's pretty optimized down to their 21 ingredients, salad bars have 50, 60 ingredients, and they offer the world to their customers and have these really long prep lines. So there's a lot of labor deployment behind that. And most of those ingredients in the distribution of demand for them, a lot of them are in these really small pans, and they're just granular toppings or a large variety of sauces. So being able to automate that offsets a lot more, it gives a lot more capacity and productivity to the store than going after the highly optimized stores first. So we started there and built a salad robot that was modular automation again and could handle all these different types of ingredients. The modularity, I think, is a really key part because you want flexibility, but you don't need to go to the extreme end. And my belief in most cases, unless you're deploying super fast and the problems are so different, go for full robot arms, deploy those. But if you can create a structured environment, which most manufacturing and most production environments are, I look at it as like a semi-structured environment and create the right bits of modular breakpoints in your automation, you can start to piece these together and readapt them for different customers. So we can deploy in the same day with a Chipotle and the same day with a startup, and it's the same system. It's just configured differently. So you got to be smart about where those breakpoints are. But I think that's a more efficient approach if you understand the problem really well.
Right. So knowing how to make your system plug and play, and what are those pieces that you can mix and match for different scenarios.
Yeah. In past lives with consumer electronics, when we do automation for things like your Fitbit or wearable, it would be traditionally those things aren't heavily automated because the product life cycles are so short. To invest in the CapEx and solving all those problems, you'll eclipse the product life cycle and not get a return on that automation. So your phone and laptop from Apple are still mostly assembled by hand. But we worked with some of these suppliers in the EMS space and consumer electronics, and there were some more progressive ones who would figure out how could you take PSA, the pressure sensitive adhesive for these screens or pieces of glass, peel it off, and they, in their in-house teams, may have solved that one problem. And if you can automate that, you can make it adaptable for every single product life cycle, because it's pretty much normalized now that you use that type of adhesive in this way to attach screens to glass to enclosures. So once that's solved, you can create a work cell around just that one task, and then that's your breakpoint in the modularity. So if you accumulate enough of these capabilities of automation, you can start like Lego blocks, rearranging them and reuse that automation for the next product lifecycle rather than having to ditch it, which traditional rigid automation requires you to do.
Wow, this is really hardware design gold here for anybody that wants to start a hardware business and even think about not just automation, but probably any kind of task. Figuring out those breakpoints, I think is a super key message there. So I'm curious what's maybe next for Hyphen. What are some of the other, areas you're thinking about? Will we ever see quesadillas coming out of this, or burgers? Or is there more in the food space that you're looking to expand, but different types of markets perhaps?
Yeah, definitely. And burritos is the one that we always get asked for, I'd say. Even before working with Chipotle, everyone's like, when are you going to be able to automate a burrito? And we have some ideas. It's not the traditional like roll it like a person does, but we have some ideas on some cool stuff that you can do and some novel process automation to create the container and shape and whatnot. But anyways, we've been design frozen for over a year now on the product. So it's been tooled up, hard tooled across, stampings, injection molds, and a lot of our testing automation as well. That's kind of in process and end of line testing. So the most of the work we've been doing is the early part was 80/20, the reliability testing. We have an amazing advisor. He's the head of reliability at Waymo, Noah Lasser. Worked with our test engineering team to develop all of our statistical models around component reliability lifetime. We have some chambers that we have in-house and work with external labs to got the bulk of that first stuff done, but you have a long tail of continuous reliability work you do as you scale up and also just go down the full BOM and system functionality requirements. So that's ongoing. Cost down is also an ongoing thing. We're looking at different batch size optimizations for how we procure and build these machines so we can get the cost down even in unique configurations or bespoke things we may do for different customers and tack on a module to the machine that we may only build once or twice. How do we make that cost effective, as well as what are primary SKUs that make up the make line, driving those down for future handoff with our contract manufacturing partner, Rebuild Manufacturing. We've worked with them for over 3 years through all of this planning and design to ensure that when things are at a much larger scale, we can take our capacity of building 4 machines a month or so in-house and transfer over to them. But we're still keeping that close because there's a lot of optimization of the build and integration and test of the machine that we are productizing as well, so that workcell for an operator building our system is a product itself. So there's a lot of software we build into how we calibrate out a lot of low-cost components and make them very high precision. Every machine there's going to be some variability if you're not taking on the cost to make it a precision Swiss watch type of device, which we're making it in very low-cost manufacturing methods. So you got to compensate out a lot of that variability once these things are built. So all that mapping calibration work is kind of a product work cell itself that the team is developed and making mature, so we can just drop these off at other contract manufacturers. From a product and kind of growth perspective, we've, from the machine side, hit everything we need for the large brands. And now we're starting to work through the growth and scaling with them, while now we can spend more time in the other markets and segments in food service. So like I mentioned earlier, data centers is an interesting new segment that is growing quickly. And the people who are providing food service to those hyperscalers are looking for novel ways to reduce their OpEx as well. So we're spending a lot of time with them, as well as Air Force and other segments like grocery. We're looking at how do you adapt this machine into a salad bar, where post-COVID, many of these salad bars were pushed out because of sanitation and just health reasons. And they have grab-and-go meals. So we can do both those things, produce those grab-and-go meals that they have today, but then also help them bring the salad bar back into the store. And our system is at parity cost of a salad bar today. There's a lot of big custom steel weldments and things that are very labor intensive to make those. And that's how the restaurant equipment industry works. When you design a machine like we do, that's just more like an automotive design, you can actually drive that BOM cost down and get to price parity, which makes things really interesting for them. So we're starting to explore all those adaptations and the adjacent possibilities of where the product can go. And as far as like new product development, we have many, many lists now that we've spent so much time with the finance teams, field finance, corporate finance with these large companies, of knowing there's still a lot of productivity that could be improved within food prep and things like washing lettuce or cutting and dicing things. Just using a off-the-shelf kind of Roku dicer is what everyone uses today, but there's still a lot of labor behind that where you can actually offset pretty significant amounts. So we have a laundry list in our roadmap of things to tackle. It's more around where do we see the demand pull us into, but we'll probably stay within food prep, assembly, automation, and then a lot of the what they call expo or kind of quality control and consolidation of all the items that go into an order and ensuring that those are accurate and get out the door quickly.
Yeah, amazing. It's a super exciting problem space. And in the past hour, I was able to get that view into all of these little factors and ever growing segment where we will, of course, need to have meals in a world that is, in fact, looking for efficiency in all of these different aspects. This is going to be very much of a key player. So super excited to see where everything goes with Hyphen.
Yeah, it's a tough world in restaurants versus manufacturing, but it's been really fun to be able to climb a really steep mountain.
I would love to do like a future episode to kind of drill into some of these things today, to just talking about reliability, verification, and using some of this agentic orchestration or where software can really help. Did talk about simulation in the past, but I'd love to end with your advice for people in the space or looking to get into the space. What would be something you would say to maybe investors, to future founders and builders that are working in food services?
Yeah, within I think this applies to a lot of industries, but for us, it's been very clear as well too. The hard part's not building the robot. The hard part is how do you get a culture of how people have done work in this industry to adapt and change. So we went into it with where we saw the biggest issues, problems, and on paper, it makes sense. And with the finance teams as well on the other end, you can pencil all this out. But you're asking people who their livelihoods and careers were built on the way things work today. So getting them to change is something you need to either test the waters with and see like what that tolerance is and what that velocity will look like for you. And, I think if we were to start Hyphen today, we probably wouldn't start with such a big, huge make line of machine. It took a while for us to get to a point where we can show those proof points of how this thing operates and minimizing and working through all the design iterations as well of the product to minimize how much change we're asking. But even then, you just have a lot of folks who they have pride in their jobs and this is how they do it. And that's going to take much longer to change than it will to engineer something. We had the CEO of one of these large public companies just really fixate on these food contact surfaces need to be metal when plastic has been validated and by competitors as well, used regularly day to day and is food safe. So, but there's just this kind of demand of we need to have it be this type of material. And we're not going to change that way. So for us, we actually just decided, let's take the engineering hit and design it that way and come up with ways to create these really crazy shapes out of stainless steel rather than injection molded components like a Vitamix blender and whatnot. So those, I think, are always trade-offs you're going to have to make working with these customers of you may do things that from an engineering or product perspective may not be optimal, but will get the adoption you need on the other end, or just break apart the problem smaller so you're asking less change on the other end. I think that's really important to decide too. What's your roadmap of being able to show proof points, build that trust with the customer, and then deliver value as fast as you can, and then build into more change along the way. So being aware of how much you're asking to transform is a big one. And yeah, I'd say just from the founder side too, there's always going to be a lot of demands on you to go for the big prize, go for the big accounts, focus and go all in on those. And you got to be cautious too, because that's you want to do things that will lead to further investment and further traction with fundraising. But at the same time, as a founder, this is your one bet and they have 20, 30 other bets. So you got to know like what you should, if you can chew gum and walk at the same time and maybe do some things to hedge of working with going all in on one large account versus also having some medium-sized accounts that you can get some faster wins with and then show proof points of the technology out in the field and scaling and working.
Awesome. Daniel, thank you so much for joining, for taking the time to do this. This was super, super fun. And yeah, just, looking forward to getting my bowl of Chipotle and Cava from you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. That was super fun as well. Really appreciate it.